And we're back for Thursdays with Charlie. This is episode number 29 on the 19th of November. Can you believe we've been doing this for 29 weeks? Hopefully you've been enjoying it as much as I have. I look forward to them every week. And next week will be a special Thanksgiving show, so we'll look forward to that. That'll be our 30th episode, and we'll celebrate the great American feast of Thanksgiving. Our reservation system is still working and we're still using it. We thank you very much for that, but so far we've been able to take those who show up without a reservation and just write in their phone numbers and their names and take their temperatures, etc. Hopefully that will continue. If we get any change in that because of the spread of the COVID virus, we will try to get the word out as fast as possible. We are planning on having a Mass on Thanksgiving Day. That will be 8 a.m. next Thursday here at the church. We'll look forward to that. No reservations needed for that Mass. We will do temperatures, names, and phone numbers at the door, and the doors will open 25 minutes before 8 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day. So if you'd like to spend the beginning of Thanksgiving Day with us, we look forward very much to having you do that. I think you remember on Sunday I mentioned that our Christmas party had to be canceled because the restrictions that were being put on it, and who knows what further restrictions might come. So for this year will be the first year in a long time that there has been no Christmas party officially for us. So we'll look forward to celebrating extra well next year to make up for it. And on Thanksgiving Day, I think I mentioned in the sermon on Sunday that one of the recommendations of the CDC is that if you're going for somebody's home for Thanksgiving, you should bring your own food and your own utensils. I really think that's a bad idea, but if you are capable of preparing your own food and bringing your own utensils, you can honor the CDC's recommendation. I probably won't be, otherwise I would be eating popcorn on Thanksgiving. I'm going to go for what someone else has prepared. This has been a week of interesting items, and I'd like just to mention a couple of them. On Sunday, I mentioned this wonderful mini panettone that someone had given me, and it's really good. And the nice part about it is panettone is this sweet bread, and they usually come in a much larger size. And by the time you eat your way through the larger size, it's stale. But this little one, it's like a little cupcake inside, and it's excellent, and it disappears right away into your mouth. I mentioned this on Sunday at the Masses, and I have to tell you, so far, I've received 41 of these. People are very generous, and I'm very grateful for it because it really is delicious, and they keep for a long time. And I had mentioned last week I got a ride in a 57 Chevy, and I got some pictures of these. We'll post some of these up on Facebook, riding in the 57 red Chevy. It really was a fun time and something neat to do. And then someone donated a whole bag of Beanie Babies. We'll use these for something later on in the year, but I pulled out this cute little military Beanie Baby. He's got a desert cami uniform on. And then there was another one over here. I'm sorry, that was the regular cami. This is the desert cami uniform. For some reason, it has a British flag on it, so I'm not sure. It's an American Beanie Baby, but the British flag is there. I'm not sure if that is an error. Maybe this is a valuable misprint, or maybe it is really a British bear in it. Then we got this wonderful monkey. It's not actually a Beanie Baby, but it's a really cute monkey, and he makes some great noise. I'm not sure how we're going to use him, but I'm glad to get him. So that's the things that have shown up this week. Last weekend, our first reading on Sunday was taken from an Old Testament book, the book of Proverbs. It's a very famous book. Legend says that it was actually written by King Solomon, who's regarded as the wisest human person who ever lived. And the legend is that Solomon wrote the entire book of Proverbs. Proverbs is a beautiful book, and it's got a lot of practical wisdom in it, but we have a lot of practical wisdom in American Proverbs. They're short sayings that teach something that we kind of all know is true. And I have a cute little story about Proverbs that I learned a long time ago. There was this little school, and they had maybe a third or fourth grade children in this particular class, and the teacher wanted to teach them about Proverbs. And so she said as a homework assignment that they should think of a proverb, and then they should come in and they should tell a story which illustrates the proverb for their next class. So the next day, Mary comes in and she has her proverb and she's reading. The teacher says, "Mary, tell us your story and then the proverb." And Mary says, "Well, my family has a chicken farm and we had a bunch of eggs that were laid, and we were getting ready that we were going to take them and sell them when they became chickens, and there was 24 eggs, and we were ready. Wow, that would be 24 chickens we'd be able to sell. But when the eggs hatched, we only had 15 chickens. So that's all we had to sell, even though we were counting on 24. And the teacher says, "Well, Mary, that's a very good story. What's the proverb?" And Mary said, "Well, don't count your chickens before they hatch." The teacher said that was very good. And then she asked, is there any other student wanted to share their proverb? And Helen said, "Oh, I have one too. Our family also raises chickens, and we had 24 eggs, and we were going to take them to the market to sell. And so we put them in a basket and we put them in the back of the car, and while riding to the market, the car hit a bump, and the basket popped up and some of the eggs broke. So instead of having a whole basket of eggs, we only had a few eggs to sell." The teacher said, "Helen, that's a very good story. What's the proverb?" And she says, "Well, don't put all your eggs in one basket." The teacher said, "That's very good." She said, "Is there anybody else who has a story with a proverb lesson?" And a little boy raised his hand and she said, "Yes, Johnny." And he said, "My Aunt Nancy was in the Persian Gulf War, and she was flying on a helicopter, and the helicopter got shot down. And as she was falling, she opened her parachute, and all she had with her was a gun and a bottle of whiskey. And she came down on the ground and she drank the whiskey, and she took the gun and she shot, and she was able to kill all those who had shot down the plane right there. But then there was another group that came up, and she fought them with her own bare hands, and she was able to fight them all off, and she was there standing safely by herself on the ground." The teacher said, "Johnny, that's an awful story. What's the possible proverb that you have that goes with that story?" And she says, "Don't mess with Aunt Nancy when she's been drinking." A good lesson one. In our bulletin this week, you'll find a list of about 15, 16, 17 proverbs that we've printed. Some of them are as common as, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Some of them are very visual, and they're good to think about. We're going to post a list of them after the show on Facebook as well, so hopefully you'll be able to enjoy them. These are typically American proverbs. I thought in honor of Thanksgiving coming next week, they would be a good thing for us to kind of think about a little bit. Now, we got a lot of good questions for this week, and I'm looking forward to dealing with some of them with you, and I hope you'll enjoy dealing with them with me. The first one is, how is a saint's day determined? We know that many days of the week have particular saints assigned to them. How do they get those days? And I partially answered this question earlier on when I mentioned that only 3 are honored on their birthdays. And so we honor Jesus on his birthday, the greatest of all. We honor Mary on September the 8th, which is her birthday, and we honor our parish patron, John the Baptist, on June 24th, his birthday. Most saints are not honored in the church on the birthdays that they have. They're honored on the date that they died, either dying as a martyr, giving their life for the faith, or dying a natural death, and that day, or if that date has already been used for another saint, the date nearest that date is usually the date on which a saint is honored. There are a couple of exceptions. The exceptions would be perhaps a saint who founded a famous religious order might be honored on the date of the order's founding. That would be the significant date in that saint's life. But most often, it's the date on which the saint died. And then the question went on to talk about, the way we observe saints' feasts. Some feasts are very, very local. Like the date a church is dedicated is usually honored only within that church, particularly. And there are some local saints. They're more honored in some areas than in others. Those saints maybe are local to a geographic area. Maybe they're honored more in the United States than they are in Canada or in Germany, or maybe vice versa. There are some saints. For instance, I would mention the Blessed Virgin Mary is honored in the United States as the Immaculate Conception. So December the 8th is a big celebration liturgically in the United States. It's not as big elsewhere in the world because the Immaculate Conception, while it's honored, is not the national patron. And generally, categories of saints, the way we honor them, fall into 4 categories. There's an optional memorial, which means we can remember the saint if we want to, or we don't have to. Some saints are optional because they're not known maybe outside of a large area. They're not known outside of a particular nationality, and they'd be honored more locally within that group. Then there's the saints that are honored with a memorial. That's generally honored throughout the universal church, or at least throughout a nation, throughout this particular country. Then there is the next highest category is a feast. That would be held pretty sacred throughout the universal church, and it's generally someone recognized as a very high category. It's not ignored anywhere. And the highest category, shall we say, is a solemnity, and that's honored everywhere, and it usually includes things like a Gloria, the glory to God in the highest. Many times will include a creed, I believe in God, the Father Almighty. We'll go through. It's held the greatest solemnity. So those would be the 4 main categories: an optional memorial, a feast, and then finally solemnity. If it should ever happen that because of the way days are running, they fall on the same date, the higher one would top the lower one on that particular feast. Got a question about the assignment of priests and the term limits of priests. Up until 1975, term limits for priests in parishes were virtually unknown. You might have had a term limit if you were in a teaching position and it would apply you hired for a certain number of years. But parish priests working in parishes around the world in the church generally there were no term limits whatever. The pastor was assigned as a permanent pastor. And that meant generally he was in that parish from the date of his assignment until the date he died. Or if he were moved from that parish to another parish, it would be by his request, or the church would negotiate with him and say, we feel you would be more useful here. Would you like to go? It was a movement that was the priest had a lot of control over. There was nothing like you can only stay here for so long. So permanent pastors kind of went by the wayside after 1975, except in some areas. Some dioceses didn't go along with it for many, many years. Very soon after 1975, they began to limit the terms on assistants. And so instead of it being, well, you can stay there until we decide to move you, they were put on 6-year terms. So most assistants would remain in a parish for 6 years and then move to another parish for 6 years, and then maybe after that be assigned as a pastor in a parish somewhere. The movement of priests depended on the bishop, depended on the needs of the diocese, depended on how many priests there were. At one time, many parishes, especially in the larger dioceses, included 3 priests. There was a pastor, who was the one in charge. There was a young assistant who was usually newly out of the seminary or only a few years ordained. And then there was a middle assistant who kind of was getting ready to become a pastor somewhere. And so he was kind of in the middle between the young priest just out of the seminary and the older pastor. He kind of was the middleman in there. As the number of priests has decreased, many parishes have never experienced the luxury of having 3 priests. Some have never experienced the luxury of having 2 priests, and many priests right now are working on their own in individual parishes. I should mention that in the case of administrators, of which I am one, administrators, there are no term limits on administrators. And so an administrator could be moved tomorrow, or an administrator could be left in position for many, many years or decades. I've been here, this is my 13th year here as the administrator, and I hope I get to stay for a long, long time to come. But the term limits are basically upheld where it's possible. And there are exceptions. Dioceses that don't have the vast number of priests might be inclined to leave somebody in a place longer because they don't have a replacement ready to go up there. The third question this week was, how many parishes are there in the Diocese of Las Vegas? There are 38 parishes in our Diocese of Las Vegas, and they're divided into 3 categories or deaneries. There's the Northern Deanery, which are all those parishes north of Flamingo Road in Las Vegas and going on up. And there's the Southern Deanery, which are those parishes below Flamingo Road and going south. And then ringing the diocese are the rural parishes. So there are 13 Northern Deanery parishes, 13 Southern Deanery parishes, and there are 12 rural deanery parishes. And as I mentioned, the bishop appointed me in 2019 to be the rural dean. So those 12 parishes, of which St. John the Baptist here in Laughlin is one, are the things that I'm concerned with, and I've tried to get out to visit. I try to be in touch with the priests that are assigned there. The question went on further, are there any parishes that do not have a resident priest? And in our Diocese of Las Vegas, we have one parish without a resident priest, and that's Holy Child Parish in Caliente, Nevada. The administrator there is a deacon, Deacon Patrick Fitzsimons. And it's one of our older parishes. It was founded in the 1800s, but there are no priests. It's a very small parish. It's out in Caliente, which is about maybe 2 hours to the northeast of Las Vegas. And it's one of our rural parishes, so it's within my rural deanery, and it's a beautiful place. If you ever are up in that area, Caliente is a beautiful little town. Used to be very much connected with the railroad. The railroad used to stop in there, but then the railroad tended to move further south, so it could include Las Vegas as the main point through which it ran. Next question was kind of a personal one, but a fun one to think about. Are there any things left on your bucket list? things you would like to do in life yet. And I was able to quickly come up with 3 or 4 of them that, yes, I really want to do these yet in my life. The first one might sound a little odd. I want to go to Branson, Missouri. I have never been to Branson. And I remember hearing about it being built up. It's where a lot of country entertainers have gone, and they built theaters. I don't know how it's doing so much now in the COVID virus days, but it was really an exciting place in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri. Lots of shows. It was said you could go to 3 or 4 shows a day in Branson because some of the shows started in the morning. There would be a breakfast show at 10 o'clock, and then you could go to a lunch show around noon or 1 o'clock, and you can go to an early evening show around 4 or 5 o'clock, and you can go to an evening show around 7 or 8 o'clock. All of these in the beautiful Ozark Mountains of Missouri. So my goal on my bucket list, I still want to get to Branson, Missouri someday. Other things of travel, I do want to go back to Australia and New Zealand. I was able to go there 3 times in my life. I would like to make it a 4th time. I found both of those countries extremely beautiful, extremely relaxing, incredible scenery, incredible animals. I love the koalas. I love kangaroos. I love seeing all the flora and fauna of the area. And I was able to go there so far 3 times. I would like to make it a 4th time sometime in my life to get to see that. I would also like to see more of rural Nevada. I've seen a lot of it visiting the parishes and the rural deanery, but I have not seen the whole state yet, and I really do want to see more and more of Nevada, get around to the various corners of our state, the Old West, the territorial days, and hear more about the stories that come out of towns like Elko and Reno and Carson City and Virginia City. I would love to get up and see more and more of them. The one other thing that I quickly thought of on my bucket list, I do want to finish my book on Father Garces. Actually, it's 2 books. I want to finish the comic book on Father Garces so everybody can learn about him, and I want to finish a more serious book about his life and times. So both of those are being worked on. I think the comic book will come out first. But we're working on those, and that's probably the 4 main items on my bucket list. The 5th question was a more serious one. How are sacraments related to living the moral life? And I thought about this, and I think the best way to approach it is to say that the sacraments, the 7 sacraments that we have in our Catholic Church, contribute to leading the moral life by encouraging us along the way. And so in baptism, you're started on the path toward a Catholic moral life. You're opened to all the other sacraments that can be there. So that you start on the way. When you receive the sacrament of penance, you're encouraged. You're encouraged to put the wrongs behind you, put good ahead of you. You can always make a new start. There's encouragement that's there. Receiving the Holy Eucharist gives you strength to go through life. The sacrament of confirmation encourages you to study, to learn, to become more of an adult in the moral life. And then there's the sacrament of matrimony or of holy orders, encourages those who are going in for either of those sacraments to advance, either as a married couple or as an individual priest, to work your way through your life. Some people go through life without either of those sacraments, and they're living the single life, so they'd be encouraged by the other sacraments along the way, or supporting those in the priesthood or in the married life by the way they live honorably as a single person, striving to live a good life in this world. And finally, at the end of life, the sacrament of the sick, which used to be called extreme unction, kind of the crowning one that you're there even at the moment of death, or just when you're undergoing some serious illness, you can turn to God. You can be encouraged at that point of your life. Our sixth question had to do with if you could only pray one prayer for the rest of your life, what would that prayer be? And that was actually an easy one to answer. If I could only pray one prayer, well, that prayer would be the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And I would credit that as being worthwhile as the only prayer because it is the only prayer that Jesus ever taught us. It's a beautiful prayer. It's an all-encompassing prayer. It can be said by someone very, very young, or it can be said by someone very, very old, and it covers what you need, what you want, what God wants for you at that moment. Another question was, can a person be happy if they don't follow God's plan for their lives? I think the quick answer to that would be, I don't think so. I think you would not be happy if you're not following what God intended for you to do, or you're not striving to know what that is. I think you could experience some moments of happiness along the way just by chance, but I think your greater chance of being happy, really happy, is knowing that that happiness is leading to an eternal vision of God and peaceful eternity with God, and finding out what God wants you to be doing as you go through the days and weeks and months and years of this life. Sometimes it's very convoluted, and sometimes it's very, very clear. But to just keep pursuing it, I think, is the way to true happiness. And the last question for today had to do with priests and recreation. Can a priest do just about anything to have fun? And the simple answer is pretty much yes. We'd have to rule out those things that would be immoral. You wouldn't do them. But among the things that are moral, you could have a wide variety of things that you could do. So I listed a couple of things that I like to do when I have free time. I do like to read. Now, because of my eyesight lately, reading might include having something read to me or having it read aloud, or books on tape, things like that. I enjoy learning new things, seeing new facts, kind of trying to piece things together as I go through life. Connected with that is I enjoy writing. I love writing things. I love preparing for the Sunday sermons. I love preparing for the Thursday shows. I love writing the books on Father Garces. I love writing about other things too. I've always been someone who has felt comfortable putting things in writing. I enjoy dining. I love going out for dinner, for lunch. I enjoy that very much, experiencing somewhat new foods. I'm kind of not a very excitable eater, but I do enjoy seeing the way foods are prepared. I enjoy tasting them. I enjoy seeing what they mean in a particular culture or in a particular family. And of course, I enjoy magic, getting to see live magic. Lately, I've been deprived of that. I've seen a lot online, but I am looking forward to getting through this virus and ending up getting back into the great magic shows here in Laughlin and up in Las Vegas as well. So those would be the four main things I do for recreation. And it's about time for us to bring our show to an end, and Pascal comes on down with his message. This message comes to you actually courtesy of a good friend of mine whom I was talking to this week. I just translated it into Latin, but it's Deus Providebit. Deus Providebit. And in English it is, God will provide. I think that's a way to happiness for all of us. It's a way to peace for all of us. Just realizing that God will always provide what we need. It may not be what we choose at that particular moment that we would want, but it would always be what God wants us to have. God will provide, and He will get us through the rough times, and He will give us the good times to enjoy as well. God love you, and thanks for joining me once again for Thursdays with Charlie.